The cold iron of the shackles bit into Harriet Simmons' wrists as she stood trembling on the auction platform, her gaze fixed on the crowd of harsh faces below. Fort Collins, Colorado, 1873, a place that once promised new beginnings now threatened to become her prison. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the dusty square, describing her as if she were livestock rather than a 20-year-old woman who'd lost everything. What am I bid for this fine housekeeper? Young, strong, educated enough to read and write. Indentured for 5 years to cover her late father's debts. The auctioneer's tobacco-stained smile made her stomach turn. Starting bid at $50. Harriet scanned the crowd, searching for any hint of kindness, but found none. Instead, her eyes locked with Jeremiah Blackwell's, the town's richest man and most feared landowner. His cold stare traveled up and down her body, calculating her worth as property rather than a person. 3 days ago, he'd visited her in the holding cell, making it clear what kind of service he expected if he purchased her contract. $50, Blackwell called out, his voice carrying across the square. Harriet's legs threatened to give way beneath her. She'd heard the stories of girls who disappeared into Blackwell's remote ranch. Some said he worked them to death. Others whispered darker fates. 75, called another voice, and Harriet's head snapped up. Standing at the back of the crowd was a tall man she'd never seen before. Broad-shouldered and sun-weathered, he looked to be in his early 30s. Unlike Blackwell's fancy suit, this stranger wore practical ranching clothes, faded denims, a simple cotton shirt, and a worn leather vest. His eyes were fixed not on her body but on her face. $100, Blackwell countered, irritation creeping into his voice. $150, the stranger responded without hesitation. The crowd murmured. No one challenged Blackwell in Fort Collins. $200, Blackwell snapped, turning to glare at the stranger. The tall man stepped forward, his boots stirring the dust as he moved through the parting crowd. $250. His voice remained calm, but something in his stance suggested he could continue all day. Blackwell's face darkened. You're new here, cowboy. You don't know what you're getting into. $300, the stranger said, ignoring the threat. The auctioneer looked nervously between Blackwell and the stranger before clearing his throat. $300 going once. Blackwell spat in the dust. You'll regret this, he said to the stranger before turning on his heel and stalking away. $300 going twice. Sold to Mr. Lawson. Lucas Lawson, the stranger supplied, approaching the platform. Relief flooded through Harriet, followed immediately by new fear. She'd escaped Blackwell, but who was this man? What would he demand of her? Lucas Lawson climbed the steps to the platform and handed payment to the auctioneer, who quickly provided the indentured contract. When Lucas turned to her, Harriet flinched involuntarily. His eyes softened. I won't hurt you, Miss Simmons. He spoke quietly so only she could hear. I need help with my ranch, nothing more. The sheriff stepped forward to unlock her shackles. She's your responsibility now, Lawson. 5 years of service or until the debt's paid. Lucas nodded, then looked at Harriet. My wagon's this way if you're ready. Harriet rubbed her raw wrists, avoiding his gaze. I have nothing to gather. They took everything when they seized my father's home. Something like anger flashed across Lucas's face, but it wasn't directed at her. Then we'll stop at the general store before heading home. You'll need some things. The ride to the general store was silent. Harriet sat as far from Lucas as possible on the wagon bench, watching him from the corner of her eye. His profile was strong, his expression thoughtful as he guided the horses through town. At Miller's general store, Lucas handed her a small pouch of coins. Get whatever you need, clothes, personal items. I'll wait outside. Harriet stared at the money in disbelief. You're trusting me with this? It's not trust that makes a person trustworthy, Miss Simmons. It's being treated like you deserve trust in the first place." He tipped his hat and stepped outside. Inside, Mrs. Miller helped her select practical dresses, undergarments, a coat for the approaching winter, and personal necessities. When Harriet returned more than half the money to Lucas, his eyebrows rose slightly, but he merely pocketed it with a nod. As they left town, the mountains looming in the distance, Harriet finally found her voice. "Why did you buy my contract, Mr. Lawson?" Lucas kept his eyes on the road. "I needed help at my ranch. There are men looking for work all over Colorado territory, cheaper than what you paid for me." His hands tightened on the reins. "I saw Blackwell eyeing you. I know his reputation. So you spent $300 out of charity." Harriet pressed, unable to believe anyone would do such a thing. Lucas was quiet for so long that Harriet thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "5 years ago, my younger sister was sold to cover my father's gambling debts. I was working in California, didn't know until it was too late. By the time I found her—" He paused. "No one should own another person, Miss Simmons." They traveled for nearly 2 hours before cresting a hill that revealed a modest but well-maintained ranch spread out below them. A sturdy 2-story house stood near a large barn with corrals and pastures stretching behind it. Cattle grazed in the distance, and a small creek wound through the property. "This is the Double L," Lucas said. "It's not much compared to Blackwell's empire, but it's mine, free and clear." As they approached the house, a heavy-set woman emerged from the front door, wiping her hands on her apron. "That's Mrs. Finch," Lucas explained. "She comes 3 days a week to cook and help with the house. She's expecting you." Mrs. Finch welcomed them at the door with a warm smile. "About time you found someone to help around here, Mr. Lawson. This place is too big for a bachelor to manage alone." Inside, the house was simple but comfortable. Well-crafted furniture, clean floors, and curtained windows suggested care rather than luxury. "Mrs. Finch will show you to your room," Lucas said. "We'll talk about your duties tomorrow. Tonight, just rest." Harriet followed Mrs. Finch upstairs, expecting a servant's quarters or attic space. Instead, the older woman led her to a proper bedroom with a real bed, dresser, and window overlooking the mountains. "Mr. Lawson fixed this room up special when he heard about the auction," Mrs. Finch said, helping Harriet unpack her meager purchases. "Said whoever came to work here deserved a proper place of their own." Harriet ran her hand over the quilt. "I don't understand. He spent a small fortune on my contract, and now this." Mrs. Finch's expression softened. "That young man has seen his share of the world's cruelty, Miss Simmons. Makes some bitter, makes others kind. He's the latter." She patted Harriet's hand. "Rest now. Things will seem clearer in the morning." After Mrs. Finch left, Harriet sat on the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. For the first time since her father's death 3 weeks ago, she felt something other than fear, a fragile, tentative hope. Morning came with the sound of roosters and the smell of coffee. Harriet dressed in one of her new work dresses and made her way downstairs to find Lucas at the kitchen table, reading a newspaper. He stood when she entered. "Morning, Miss Simmons. Sleep well." "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted. "Thank you for the room." Lucas nodded toward the stove where coffee and breakfast waited. "Mrs. Finch left before dawn, but she made enough for both of us." As they ate, Lucas explained her duties. "The ranch needs plenty of work, but I won't ask anything unreasonable. Cooking, cleaning, mending, whatever household tasks you're comfortable with. The barn and livestock are my domain, though help is always welcome during busy times." "I can cook and clean," Harriet said. "My father taught me to keep books as well. He was an accountant before. Her voice faltered. Before the typhoid took him, Lucas finished gently. Mrs. Finch told me. I'm sorry for your loss. Harriet looked away, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Her father had been everything to her, her only family since her mother died when Harriet was 10. I could use help with the ranch accounts, Lucas continued, allowing her the moment to compose herself. If you're willing. The days fell into a rhythm. Harriet rose early to prepare breakfast, then spent mornings cleaning and afternoons working on the account books. Lucas worked from dawn to dusk, managing cattle, fixing fences, and handling the endless tasks of ranching. They ate dinner together each evening, their conversations gradually expanding from ranch matters to books they'd read, places they'd seen, and carefully shared pieces of their pasts. Harriet learned that Lucas had grown up in Missouri, left home at 17 to escape his father's drunken rages, and spent years working ranches across the West before saving enough to buy his own land. He never spoke again of his sister, but Harriet often caught him watching her with a protective expression that suggested the wound remained fresh. Autumn deepened into winter. The first snow came in November, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Harriet stood at the kitchen window one morning, watching Lucas trudge through the snow toward the barn, his shoulders hunched against the cold. Mrs. Finch appeared beside her. He works too hard, that one. He does, Harriet agreed, surprising herself with the concern in her voice. Mrs. Finch gave her a knowing look. Christmas is coming. Perhaps something to warm him might be appropriate. The suggestion stayed with Harriet. That afternoon, she searched through the attic and found a trunk of yarn and knitting needles. Though her skills were rusty, memories of her mother's lessons guided her fingers. Every evening after Lucas retired, she worked on a thick woolen scarf, determined to finish it before Christmas. December brought harsh winds and deeper snow. Lucas often returned from the barn with red, chapped hands and a weary slump to his shoulders. One evening, he didn't come in for dinner at the usual time. As dusk deepened and the wind howled outside, Harriet grew concerned. Wrapping herself in her coat, she fought her way through the snow to the barn. Inside, she found Lucas slumped against a stall, his face pale, a deep gash in his forearm. "What happened?" she demanded, kneeling beside him. "Metal edge on the trough," he muttered. "Caught it wrong while breaking ice for the horses." Harriet helped him to his feet. "You need stitches. Can you make it to the house?" Together they struggled through the snow. In the kitchen, Harriet cleaned the wound by the stove's warmth, then threaded a needle with shaking hands. "I've never done this before," she admitted. Lucas gave her a tight smile. "Can't be worse than bleeding to death." The first stitch made him flinch, but he remained steady as she worked. When she finished, she wrapped his arm in clean bandages. "Thank you," he said softly. Looking up, Harriet realized how close they were sitting. His eyes, usually guarded, held something that made her heart beat faster. For a moment she thought he might lean forward, but instead he cleared his throat and stood. "You should get some rest," she said, suddenly awkward. "You too," he replied, and she could have sworn his voice had roughened. Christmas Eve arrived with clear skies and sparkling snow. Mrs. Finch had come to help prepare a special dinner, filling the house with delicious aromas. As they ate by candlelight, Harriet marveled at how different this Christmas was from what she had feared just months ago. After dinner, Lucas surprised her with a gift, a leather-bound journal with her initials tooled into the cover. "For your thoughts," he said simply. Harriet gave him the scarf, wrapped in brown paper. "It's not much." Lucas ran his fingers over the blue wool, his expression softening. "No one's made me anything since I was a boy." He wrapped it around his neck immediately, the color bringing out the blue in his eyes. That night, Harriet wrote in her new journal, 3 months ago, I thought my life was over. Now, I'm beginning to wonder if perhaps it's just beginning. January brought the harshest weather of the winter. A blizzard howled around the ranch house for 3 days, forcing Lucas and Harriet to remain indoors. They played cards, read aloud from Lucas's small library, and talked more deeply than before. Harriet spoke of her father's gentle wisdom and her mother's musical laugh. Lucas shared stories of his adventures across the West, from the California goldfields to the Texas cattle drives. On the third night, as they sat before the fire, Lucas suddenly asked, "What will you do when your contract is up?" The question startled Harriet. She hadn't thought beyond the present. "I don't know, find work somewhere, I suppose." Lucas stared into the flames. "You could stay. Not as an indentured worker, as a paid housekeeper if you wanted." "Is that what you want, for me to be your housekeeper?" The words came out more pointed than she intended. His eyes met hers, intense and unreadable. "What I want?" He shook his head. "It doesn't matter. You deserve your freedom when the time comes." Before Harriet could press him further, a crash from outside interrupted them. Lucas grabbed his coat and rifle, heading into the storm. He returned minutes later, supporting a half-frozen man, one of the hands from the neighboring ranch. "Got separated from the others," the man stammered through chattering teeth. "Checking fence lines when the storm worsened." They warmed him by the fire, gave him hot coffee and food, and prepared the spare room. As Harriet helped Lucas gather blankets, their hands touched. Instead of pulling away, Lucas's fingers gently closed around hers. "I don't want you to be just my housekeeper," he said quietly. "But I won't hold you to anything. When your contract ends, the choice will be yours." The blizzard passed, and their guest departed with profound thanks. Life returned to its rhythm, but something had changed between Harriet and Lucas. Their conversations held new undercurrents, their glances lingered longer, and the atmosphere in the house seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. February brought the first hint of spring, with occasional warm days breaking the winter's grip. On one such day, Harriet was hanging laundry when she spotted riders approaching Jeremiah Blackwell and two of his men. Lucas emerged from the barn, positioning himself between Harriet and the visitors. "Lawson," Blackwell called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "I've come to make you an offer for your land." "Not interested," Lucas replied evenly. Blackwell dismounted, removing his gloves with deliberate slowness. "You're surrounded by my property on 3 sides. This piece would complete my holdings nicely. I'm prepared to be generous." "The double L isn't for sale at any price." Blackwell's gaze shifted to Harriet. "Perhaps we could discuss a different arrangement. I'm still interested in the girl's contract." Harriet felt cold despite the sunshine. Lucas's posture stiffened, though his voice remained calm. "Miss Simmons isn't property to be traded." "Everything has its price," Blackwell smiled thinly. "Think about it, Lawson. I'll be back." He nodded toward Harriet. "Good day, Miss Simmons. I haven't forgotten you." After they rode away, Lucas approached Harriet, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hands trembled. "Why does he want your land so badly?" "There's talk of the railroad coming through," Lucas explained, leading her back to the house. "This valley would be the natural path. Whoever owns the land when they survey will make a fortune." That night, Harriet found Lucas on the porch, staring at the stars. She joined him, wrapping her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "You could sell," she said quietly. "Make enough to start over somewhere else." Lucas turned to her, moonlight silvering his features. "And what about you? Would you come with me?" The question hung in the air between them. Harriet's heart raced. "Is that what you want?" Instead of answering, Lucas stepped closer. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he raised his hand to her cheek. "What I want," he said softly, "is you, Harriet. Not as a housekeeper, not because of a contract, but because you choose to stay." Harriet leaned into his touch. "I made my choice weeks ago, Lucas. I just wasn't sure if you wanted the same." When his lips met hers, the kiss was gentle, a question rather than a demand. Harriet answered by stepping closer, her hands finding his shoulders as the kiss deepened. For the first time since her father's death, she felt truly safe, not because Lucas protected her, but because with him, she found the strength to protect herself. Spring arrived in earnest, bringing new challenges. Blackwell returned twice more, each offer higher, each refusal from Lucas more determined. Meanwhile, ranch work intensified with calving season. Harriet began riding out with Lucas, helping with the new calves, learning the land she now thought of as home. On a warm April morning, they rode to the high pasture, stopping to rest by the creek that bordered Blackwell's property. As they shared a simple lunch, Lucas seemed distracted, repeatedly reaching into his pocket. "Is something wrong?" Harriet asked. Lucas took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about your contract." Harriet's heart sank. After everything, was he having doubts? "It's been 6 months," he continued, pulling a folded document from his pocket. "Half a year of a 5-year term." He handed her the papers, her indentured contract, with "paid in full" stamped across it in red ink. "I don't understand," Harriet whispered. "I've canceled the debt," Lucas explained. "You're free, Harriet. You can go wherever you choose, do whatever you want." Harriet stared at the contract, emotions warring within her. "You want me to leave?" "God, no." Lucas moved closer, taking her hands in his. "I want you to stay, but as a free woman who chooses to be here, not because a piece of paper says you must." From his pocket, he withdrew a small wooden box, opening it to reveal a simple gold ring. "I want to build a life with you, Harriet Simmons, not as your master, but as your partner. Your husband, if you'll have me." Tears blurred Harriet's vision. "You bought my freedom just to ask me to marry you." "I bought your freedom because it was right," Lucas said. "I'm asking you to marry me because I love you." Harriet threw her arms around him, nearly knocking them both into the creek. "Yes," she whispered against his neck. "Yes." Their wedding took place in June, beneath the cottonwood trees by the creek. Mrs. Finch organized everything, recruiting women from neighboring ranches to help. The county judge performed the ceremony, and even some of Blackwell's hands attended, earning their employer's displeasure but gaining the community's respect. As Lucas and Harriet exchanged vows, Harriet thought of how far she had come from that auction platform. The fear that had defined her life for so long had been replaced by something she had never expected to find again: peace. The railroad surveyors arrived in July, confirming what Lucas had suspected: the best route ran directly through the Double L. The railroad company's offer was generous, enough to buy twice the land elsewhere, but Lucas and Harriet decided to keep most of the ranch, selling only the necessary right-of-way. Blackwell made one final visit in August, his offer now bordering on desperation. When Lucas refused again, Blackwell turned to threats. "Accidents happen on ranches," he said coldly. "Fires start, cattle disappear." What Blackwell hadn't counted on was Harriet, who stepped forward with a leather portfolio. "Before you continue, Mr. Blackwell, you should know I've documented every threat, every trespass, every attempt to intimidate us." She opened the portfolio, revealing meticulously kept records. "Copies have been sent to the territorial governor with whom my husband served during the war." Blackwell's face paled. His political ambitions were well known, and the governor's favor was crucial. "You'll regret this," he sputtered, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Good day, Mr. Blackwell," Harriet said firmly. After he departed, Lucas looked at Harriet with admiration. "You never told me about those records." Harriet smiled. I learned from my father that the right documentation can be more powerful than any weapon. That night, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and purple, Lucas pulled Harriet closer. "You're an extraordinary woman, Harriet Lawson." "I had an extraordinary teacher," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "You gave me more than freedom, Lucas. You gave me the chance to discover my own strength." Winter came again, but this time Harriet welcomed it. The ranch house, once simply Lucas's home, had become theirs, filled with books, music, and laughter. When the first snow fell, they stood together by the window, watching it transform the land. "No regrets?" Lucas asked, his arms around her waist. Harriet turned in his embrace, meeting his eyes. "Only that we didn't meet sooner." In the spring of 1875, Harriet gave birth to their first child, a son they named William after her father. As she cradled the infant while Lucas sat beside them on the bed, she marveled at how completely her life had changed in just 2 years. From the auction platform where she'd stood shackled and terrified, to this moment of profound contentment, the journey seemed impossible. Yet here she was, free in every way that mattered, with a man who had never sought to own her, only to love her. News reached them that summer that Jeremiah Blackwell had lost much of his empire in a series of bad investments. By autumn, he had sold his remaining property and departed Colorado territory, his threats and intimidation nothing but a fading memory. The railroad arrived in 1876, the same year Colorado achieved statehood. Fort Collins grew rapidly, and the Lawson Ranch prospered. Lucas and Harriet expanded their holdings, built a new barn, and welcomed a daughter 2 years after William's birth. On the 5th anniversary of the day Lucas had purchased Harriet's contract, they sat together on their porch, watching their children play in the yard as the setting sun bathed everything in golden light. "You ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Harriet asked, her hand finding Lucas's. "Every day," he admitted. "But then I remind myself that some things are meant to be, even if the path to them seems dark at first." Harriet squeezed his hand, thinking of the frightened young woman she'd been and the strong, confident wife and mother she'd become. "You gave me peace when I needed it most," she said softly. Lucas brought her hand to his lips. "And you gave me a home when I'd stopped believing I deserved one." As twilight deepened into evening, they called the children inside, closing the door on the outside world. Beyond their window, the Colorado sky filled with stars, witness to a love that had begun in the most unlikely circumstances, a love built not on ownership, but on the freedom to choose each other, every day, for all the days to come.